welcome to Flight Following. On today's episode, we're going to cover the first 8 questions in Remedy Aviation's mock checkride. Here we go. We will try to rocket through these as quickly as we can for you. Our first question is, what are the required documents for the pilot and the airplane? Well, as a pilot, we need to know that under 14 CFR 61.3, that we have to carry a government-issued photo ID. It can't be expired. Driver's license, state ID, federal passport, passport card, etc. As long as they are current, we're good. Then on our person, we need to carry our medical certificate and free game to ask questions. GPA is free game to ask questions about any of these classes of medical, including basic med. So first class, second class, third class, and basic med, which we will go into detail on those in just a little bit here. You also need to have a pilot certificate on your person, whether it's a student pilot certificate, at which point you do have to have your logbook and all the endorsements in that. If you are already a private pilot going for another rating, then of course you'd have to have that certificate with you, etc. Next up, let's talk about the plane. Okay, so first up, we have to look at something. The old mnemonic we used to use was Aero. Now that planes have got new things installed in them, such as GPS and GI 275s, glass panels, etc., that didn't come from the factory, we now have to also have the supplements in the aircraft as well. So we're actually going to use the acronym SPARROW today as a learning aid, as a memory aid, and that's going to start with the supplements. So that's all the manuals for the additional equipment that was added to the aircraft. The P is for our placards, which is also limitations, and that would be like having the demonstrated crosswind placard on the dash. That would be a placard for a limitation. Okay, so that's the S and the P on Sparrow. Now let's go to the AERO, the old acronym we always used to use, where we have to have the airworthiness certificate, and that has to be visible to be able to fold the seat forward and just see that certificate without having to dig for it in the aircraft. Same with the registration cards. That's the first R in AERO. We have to have the FAA registration card and the state registration card, as well as the FAA number painted on the outside of the aircraft. And then the state decal where we're at has to be affixed to the right side near the tail of the aircraft as well. If you're going to operate internationally, you have to have a radio telephone operator's license for you as the pilot. And then the aircraft itself will also have to have the radio station license for international flight. And that's the other R. The O is the operating handbook, so we call that the POH or the AFM, depending on the age of your airplane. Basically, it's just a book that has to be within reach of the pilot at all times, the PIC at all times, and it has all of the information for performance characteristics, emergency procedures, etc. for that aircraft, so it has to be readily available at our fingertips while flying the airplane. And then finally, the current weight and balance. The factory weight and balance, if you've added different things to your airplane or taken things off, probably isn't accurate anymore. So they do have to have an updated weight and balance from a mechanic at different points in time. Let's jump into question number 2. So the second question we're going to talk about is, when does your medical expire? And are there any other medical options available to you as a pilot? Well, the answer to that is not to the point. It's pretty complicated. So let's start with knowing that we have a first class, a second class, and a third class. They all have a class of certificate plus privileges underneath them. Sometimes the hard part in that is knowing exactly what class we have and everything we can about it depending on our age, but then we have to memorize the other age group as well. So the somewhat confusing part there is the class never changes, and the duration, if you are under 40 years old for a first class, is 60 calendar months, and the duration, if you are over 40 years old for a first class, is 24 calendar months. Now this is where it kind of gets confusing, because now that's the total duration. Now we need to talk about the privilege duration. So if you are under 40, you will have first class privileges for 12 calendar months. If you are under 40, you will then have third class privileges for 48 calendar months. It seems confusing. It's not. The total duration, it will always be a first class for 60 months total if you are under 40. So if you degrade privileges, your first class is still your first class. You could just exercise the privileges of a second and then third class. So a first class, then if you are over 40, you get 6 months of first class privileges, followed by 6 months of second class privileges, and then you'll have an additional 12 months of third class privileges because you're over 40. Again, it'll always be a first class until you go renew it as something else, but there's a lot of those different caveats to how it works, okay? Second class now, that one's a little easier. If you are under 40, it's still 60 calendar months. If you're over 40, it's still 24. The privilege duration for second class is 12 months for everyone. That doesn't matter. Then you'll revert to or degrade, if you will, to a third class privilege if you are under 40 to an additional 48 months, so the total duration is the 60. And if you are over 40, you have 12 months of third class privileges because you have a 24-month total duration. Again, stays a second class, you just degrade privileges. And then third class is quite a bit easier. If you are under 40, you have it for 60 calendar months. If you are over 40, you have it for 24 calendar months. And the privileges of third class last those durations for your age group. So again, the certificate never changes class. It's just the privileges you can exercise change over time. Still in that same second question, now we're looking at the tail end of that. Are there any other medical options available to you? Well, yes. If you have a valid state driver's license and you have held a medical after 7/14/2006, you've never been revoked, denied, suspended your medical, you can have what's called basic med. And that allows you to fly with just your license and a regular physical exam by your normal state licensed physician. So you go to the website, the FAA website, you pick up a CMEC form, the Comprehensive Medical Exam Checklist. You take that to your physician. They give you the physical. They fill everything out on that form. And then you go online to the FAA's site and you take their basic med course. The physical from your doctor is good for 48 months, but that basic med course has to be recompleted every 24 months. And then the completion certificate from that and that CMEC form have to be with you on your person. They take the place of your medical and accompany your driver's license. Okay, limitations to that. Well, first off, there's really a privilege, to that they don't take away from you is you can still fly IFR if you're IFR rated, and you could also fly VFR. So there's nothing limiting you there. The limits come in international flight. You're just not allowed to. And then you can't go buy an airplane that has 8 seats and fly it. It's not legal. It has to have 7 or less seats, and you can only carry a maximum of 6 passengers plus the pilot. So 7 total, but it's 6 passengers. Any airplane that you purchase or fly under basic med cannot exceed the weight of 12,500 pounds. You cannot get paid or compensated in any way, shape, or form to fly on basic med. You're not allowed to fly in the flight levels, and that means above 18,000 feet or 17,999 feet. Once you hit 18,000 feet, you are not legal to be there, and you cannot fly any faster than 250 knots. So that doesn't mean that you can't fly an airplane that's capable of going faster or higher. You are just not allowed to go faster or higher. So question number 3. That one is, what are the privileges and limitations of a private pilot? Well, we know as a private pilot, we hopefully have learned by this point that we cannot pay less than the pro rata share of operating expenses. So for instance, if there's 2 people in the aircraft, we can split all the expenses 50-50. If there's 4 people in the aircraft, everybody pays their fair 25%, etc. No one can pay a little bit more because the pilot flew the airplane, because now you're getting compensated to fly. So everything has to split evenly, and that's what pro rata means. That can include fuel, oil, the rental fees, facility fees, landing fees, etc. Again, no compensation or higher. So one of the scenarios they might ask you in your test is, okay, you and your buddy decide to go to lunch. He calls you up first and says, hey, I want to go to lunch, fly me. Well, you have to deny that, and you have to tell the examiner, hey, I can't do that. It wasn't my idea. It has to be my idea to go fly. The examiner might say, okay, then we'll say you decided to fly. Your buddy comes with you. You get to your destination, and to this point, you have paid for everything in the flight. He gets there and he wants to give you money. So you explain to him, you can pay 50%, you'll pay 50%. And he goes, perfect, that's good. We'll do it that way. Everything is kosher there. Then he decides to try to pay for your lunch. Are you allowed to let him pay for that lunch? Well, the answer to that question is no, because that now became compensation for flying the airplane. So that's the kind of gray area there is you can't take free flight hours to fly somebody somewhere. You can't take a meal. They can't pay for your meal for you to fly them somewhere, because that is something of value to you. So that is compensation. So that's where the FAA stands on that. So pro rata share, buy your own lunch. Don't take the hours for free for somebody if you don't pay a fair share of the airplane. Okay. Um, so that's some of the limitations. Some of the privileges now, we know as a private pilot, you can get paid to fly an airplane if you're demonstrating it to a prospective buyer while you're employed as a salesman or broker, but you can only do so if you've logged at least 200 hours of total flight time. Okay, that's 200 hours of total flight time. That does not have to be PIC time. That's just total flight time. You can act as a PIC of an aircraft towing a glider if you meet the requirements in 14 CFR 61.69. And you can act as a PIC of an aircraft in connection with business if it's incidental. So say you're getting paid to be an IT guy, you're also a pilot, they're going to send you out to a meeting. You could choose to fly to that meeting, and Joe beside you in the cubicle next to you, he can jump in the airplane and ride with you. You can get paid as an IT guy on your salary to go fly out there for that meeting because you're not getting paid as a pilot, and that flight is then incidental to business. You have to be at the meeting anyway, okay? But your boss can't say, we'll give you $100 to take Joe with you. Now that's carrying passengers for compensation or hire, so you can't do that. And the other side there is if your boss says, hey, I was going to go, but since you're going, I don't have to. Throw this box in there and drop this printer off there or something, right? You can't do that either because now you're calling cargo for hire. So you got to be pretty careful there on some of that area and how that works. Question number 4 today. We're halfway there, right? Can you explain currency versus proficiency? Well, the first thing you should say when they ask you the difference between currency and proficiency is you should look at the examiner and go, currency is legal, proficiency is safe. That's the most important thing that they want to hear. Currency is what we have to complete and log to be legal. Proficiency is our minimums are met, and we are comfortable taking that flight and carrying passengers. Okay. One of the scenarios they might give you is you get your private pilot today. Say everything goes well here. You get it today. You get your license. You go home. You want to take a passenger. Do you have to log that flight? And your answer is no. I don't have to log anything ever again if I don't want to, unless it comes to currency and recency. So what we have to log to be legal to fly, every 24 calendar months, we have to log a flight review with a CFI in the aircraft for which we are rated. We have to get proof of completion, and that means the CFI signs our logbook, and there's 2 endorsements in there for the ground knowledge and the flight review knowledge. So we have to log that every 24 months to be current there. Now our takeoffs and landings, if we want to carry passengers, in the preceding, we say 90 days, you have to have completed 3 takeoffs and landings during the day to carry passengers during the day. They can be full stop, touch and go, stop and go, whatever you want. Now, if we're talking at night or at tail wheel, they have to be to a full stop, still 3 of them each to a full stop within the preceding 90 days. And it would have to be, of course, at night for nighttime flight and in a tail wheel for tail wheel flight. That's if we want to carry passengers. If we're not going to carry passengers, they don't care if you ever log anything. The other thing with the tail wheel you do have to know is you can't just jump in a tail wheel because it's an airplane single engine land and go with it. You do definitely need to have an endorsement and some training in your logbook to be able to fly that tail wheel aircraft. Moving right along. Question 5, what inspections are required for the aircraft we will be using today? Are there any other inspections that some aircraft need that this aircraft is exempt from? All right. Well, the plane that I'm taking some students to a check ride in the next few weeks here is a club plane. They own portions of it, so they're bringing their own plane. So there are some things they need to answer specifically for that we'll get to in just a moment. For our inspections, we need to remember aviates. Okay, that just it's another memory aid to help us make sure we know and don't forget anything, right? We know it's 14 CFR 91.409, and we're going to use the acronym aviates. First up in A is annual. Annual inspections due every 12 calendar months. It can replace a 100-hour inspection. It has to be completed by an A&P with an inspection authorization, or that IA, and it cannot be overflown without a special flight permit from the FSDO. You can overfly if you get a special permit for the date and time to move it from point A to point B for maintenance or inspection. And then if there is like a catastrophic event coming, say you're in Florida, a hurricane's coming, you can get a special temporary flight permit to move that airplane to a safer place so that it won't get totaled by that act of God. The other part of this A is the airworthiness directives. We've got emergency and we've got final rule. Emergency means you can't move the airplane again until it's complied with. So that repair has to be completed. Final rule is going to give you a date or timeline for completion compliance, and it could be a one-time thing or a recurrent thing. So it could be you do this once in the lifetime of the airplane and it's covered forever, or hey, this is one that we're going to have you check this AD once every 24 months, once every 12 months, etc. And then finally, if it's not quite important enough to be an airworthiness directive, it's going to be a special airworthiness information bulletin where it's somewhat of an area of concern, but it's not super dangerous, so they're just bringing it to your attention. The V in aviates then is the VOR. The VOR stands for very high frequency omnidirectional range. That is the old GPS, essentially. We tune in a radio in our aircraft, and it helps us point in the right direction to get from field to field. Now, that has to be inspected every 30 days. It can be done by the pilot if the aircraft is going to be used for IFR flight. And if we use an in-the-air checkpoint, the variance is plus or minus 6 degrees. If we're in the air and we have two VORs in our airplane, we're checking them against each other. If they are within plus or minus 4 degrees of each other, they're legal. And on the ground at a VOT or VOR test site on the ground, that variance again is plus or minus 4 degrees from what it's supposed to be. And then we just have to, the pilot can then document on the sheet the date, time, place it was inspected, and the degrees of variance, and then put a signature on it. The 100-hour inspection, that says if for hire. So that's the very important thing we were talking about, that this aircraft that I'm taking some students in is actually technically going to be exempt because they are owners. They're part owners in the aircraft. They're providing it themselves. It's not something they're renting. If you have an instructor who is providing an aircraft and themselves for the plane, then it has to have a 100-hour inspection. That inspection has to be completed every 100 hours of tachometer time. It cannot replace an annual inspection, and that's because the 100-hour can be completed by an A&P that does not have that IA authorization yet. The 100-hour can be overflown, but only if en route for inspection, and you get a max of 10 hours to overfly it. Any of that time overflown is then going to be subtracted from the next 100 hours. So use a nice, neat, clean, round numbers. Say your airplane's 100-hour inspection is due at 500 hours. And you deliver it, you have had a flight that started before 500, it went over 3 or 4 hours, so now you're at 504 hours, you have an hour's flight to your station to get it inspected, so you're at 505 when you land when they start the inspection. That means the next inspection is still due at 600 hours, meaning you only have 95 hours of usable time from inspection to inspection. So that's the kind of the overflown time subtraction from the 100 hours. Okay, the A then is for the altimeter. That's due every 24 calendar months, again, if the aircraft is going to be used for IFR flight. Transponder every 24 calendar months, and that's for every aircraft. ELT, or the emergency locator transmitter, that's got to be done every 12 calendar months. Most people just do it at their annual, typically. If the ELT is found to have over half the useful battery life depleted, they will have to replace that, or the battery if they can, or something. It will have to be serviced. And then if the testing usage or cumulative usage over the years has exceeded 60 minutes of use on that battery, then again, it will have to be repaired, serviced, replaced, etc. And then finally, the static system is the S in aviates, again, if it's for IFR flight, and that has to be completed every 24 calendar months. So question 6 then says, in terms of inoperative equipment, what questions would you ask yourself to determine if this aircraft was airworthy? Well, how that works then is we're going to look at A tomato flames F flaps. Yes, I understand that's a mouthful, but we'll go through it one step at a time. Basically, the questions you're going to ask yourself is anything broken that's on this list? Because if there's stuff on this list that's broken, then we can't fly because this is required equipment. Okay, so we'll start at the top. We have to have an airspeed indicator. We have to have a tachometer for each engine. We have to have an oil pressure gauge for each engine. If we have a more complex aircraft, we have to have a manifold pressure gauge for each altitude engine. The altimeter is required. We have to have a temperature gauge for each liquid-cooled engine or an oil temperature gauge for each air-cooled engine. There has to be a fuel gauge for each tank and a landing gear position indicator if equipped with retractable gear. The anti-collision lights are required if that aircraft was initially registered after 3/11 of 1996. And aircrafts are required to have a magnetic compass, and in some cases, a magnetometer can replace the magnetic compass. I do know, however, if you have dual GI 275s, there is an STC, or the part of that STC states that you have to retain the magnetic compass. The ELT is also required equipment unless you are doing training within 50 nautical miles of the field while doing that training, unless you're on an agricultural mission, unless the aircraft capacity is only for one person, or if you are a scheduled Part 121, so like the big airlines, Delta, United, American, that's a 121 operation. They don't have to have an ELT either. So then the safety belts from A Tomato Flames, the safety belts is the S, and then finally the F, A Tomato Flames F, is flotation devices, and that's if you're operating over water and you're beyond the glide distance of the aircraft. Okay, the nighttime VFR operations, that's 14 CFR 91205 still, but it's Section C now. You have to have fuses or circuit breakers, and if it's fuses, it has to be a full set within the reach of the PIC at all times. If the aircraft is for hire, you'll have to have an operating landing light. Anti-collision lights are required if the aircraft was manufactured after August 11th of 1971. All aircraft are required to have position lights for operating at night, and you do have to have a source of electrical power, i.e. generator, alternator, etc. So question 7 is, what items would you need to include in a good passenger briefing? Well, it just so happens we have another acronym. This one is safety. And if we go through the safety acronym, or if we make a card that we can hand to our passengers, then they'll know everything that is involved in the safety briefing. We'll have given them everything we need to for that to be a legal flight. That's 14 CFR Part 91.107. The S is for seats and seat belts. We show them how to adjust and fasten. We tell them about the shoulder harness requirements. And in a Cherokee, if you are very tall with the seat all the way back in a Cherokee, that shoulder harness is going to stop you from being able to change the fuel tank. So then at that point, you are not required to wear the shoulder harness if it hinders the operation of any of the flight controls. We need to show our passengers how to operate the air vents and environmental controls. The fire extinguisher and flotation devices, if applicable, have to show them the location and the operation. And then the exit doors and emergency procedures, we will cover that with them. And then we're going to talk to them about traffic, watching for wildlife, etc., taxiing, all that. And then we're going to inform them of the sterile cockpit requirements. So sterile cockpit is just not an idea. It is a regulation. It's 121.542, and it is for taxi, takeoff, approach, and landing, and then all operations below 10,000 feet MSL, excluding cruise. The Y on the end of safety is asking if they have any questions, and then just kindly remind them the FAA requires all flights to be non-smoking. And lastly, the last question we'll go through today for this episode is talking about, can you define the different altitudes and airspeeds and why they are important? So basically at that point in time, they want you to be able to talk about density, altitude, and how it affects you. For us, I want you to get more background knowledge and understand a little bit more. So we're going to talk about altitudes and airspeeds and everything, and we're just going to go through the list. So first, the indicated altitude is just how you read it from the altimeter if you're set to the local altimeter setting. It's indicated. It's what's indicated on the dial. It's what you're looking at. Our true altitude is the actual altitude above sea level. So even if we're sitting on the ground at our airport and the elevation is 1,854 feet, that is our actual altitude. Once we set our altitude to the altimeter setting, it should say we're at 1854. That's our actual altitude above sea level. So our indicated and our true are the same at that point in time. Absolute altitude is the actual altitude above ground level. So if I'm sitting on the ground and my indicated and true say 1854, my absolute is 0. I'm on the ground. Then our pressure altitude, that's the altitude as read from the altimeter if we set our altimeter or the Colesman window to 29 or 9 or 2, or if you're from overseas, it's 1013.2 hectopascals. But that's going to be the pressure altitude, what we read if we set that to 29 or 9 or 2. And then our density altitude is the most important one. That's our pressure altitude corrected for non-standard temperature variations. The density altitude is the single most important factor affecting aircraft performance. So basically, it's the altitude that the aircraft performs as though it's operating at. What's that mean? That's where the aircraft thinks it is. Okay? So looking at the airspeeds, then, we also have to know that indicated airspeed is what we see on the panel, and it's what the wing feels. Okay? Then we have lift performance and stall characteristics are what the wing feels, right? That's how we lift or stall, is based on the relative wind moving over the wing. So our true airspeed then is how fast we actually are moving through that pocket of air. And it can be higher than indicated. Well, it will be higher than indicated at the higher altitudes. So technically speaking, your true airspeed increases by 2% per 1,000 foot of altitude gain. Okay. So our concerns then with higher altitude, higher density altitude, we are going to notice that we're going to have a decreased rate of climb. Our engine is going to produce less power, which leads to a decreased production of thrust, which gives us slower acceleration. We're going to have a longer ground roll on takeoff because we have to build up enough wind over those wings to create that lift. We're going to have wider patterns because we're going faster. We're going to have a longer float in ground effect because we're going faster ground speed wise. And we're going to have a longer rollout on landing because our ground speed is higher at that point too. So that's questions 1 through 8 in the first section of Remedy Aviation's mock check ride. So we're going to go ahead and stop there for today, but we'll be back with more questions before too long. So stay tuned.